a middle-aged man wearing a suit and tie, holding the hand of a boy in a sailor's outfit. Around them, a crowd of elegant people. But they all have the Star of David sewn onto their clothes. They get off the cattle cars in a place that will go down in history as Alte Judenrampe, the old Jewish ramp at the Birkenau camp. Perhaps this is how the story of a man who left behind a unique, one-of-a-kind history of the Holocaust begins.
The sketchbook is the most important artistic work in the collection of the Auschwitz Museum. This is because it is the only preserved collection of drawings showing extermination.
Możemy także przypuszczać, że gdyby autor...
We may also assume that if the maker of these drawings survived, he or she would certainly try to contact the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial to find, for example, traces of their family.
We spent hours staring on every little detail on the pages of this sketchbook. We believe that we'll finally find the key to this secret of who was the author of this sketchbook.
The only chance to discover the truth is a detective analysis of even the smallest details of these drawings. So, let's start with the sketch marked with a capital A. Apart from the man and the boy, the author has distinguished one more figure. He has a hat on his head, a bow tie at the neck. Perhaps he is the boy's grandfather. This hypothesis seems to be confirmed by the next drawing. The SS man brutally tugs the child. The boy struggles to get away to his father, but the father stretches out his hands helplessly. He is powerless. The boy will join his grandfather in a moment. A terrible fate awaits them. A sketch showing selection on a ramp is marked with a capital letter B.
This scene is very dramatic, it's very moving, full of emotion. The boy is shouting, and the old man, the grandfather, is standing nearby. So maybe it's the story of the whole family.
Let's pause for a moment at the drawing marked with a capital letter B. In the distance, we see the infamous death gate of Birkenau camp. But the building looks different than nowadays. One wing is missing. Has the mysterious artist not finished the sketch? Or maybe he or she made a mistake? No, it is not a mistake. The second wing of the gate was added on only at the turn of 1943 and 44. So the author of the sketchbook must have arrived at the camp before that time.
The uniqueness of the sketchbook lies also in the fact that it constitutes the only iconographic source showing the old Jewish ramp, the so-called Alte Judenrampe, at the moment of transport arrivals.
Let's pause for a moment at the mysterious markings on some of the sketchbook pages. The artist distinguished them for a very important reason. Card A, the arrival of transports at the camp. B, selection on the ramp. C, unknowing victims go straight to the gas chamber. D, gas chamber and crematorium.
This child is seen on the third sketch in the sketchbook. this little boy in a sailor's uniform, and next to him is the grandfather. A little boy is walking, holding a woman's hand to the gas chamber.
Out of 216,000 Jewish children deported here, only about 8,500 were registered as prisoners. This means that 96% of the children who arrived at the camp had no chance of survival. They did not enter the camp, but were directed straight from the ramp to the gas chambers. The precision with which the anonymous artist sketched the site of the final stage of the Holocaust is extraordinary. The drawing shows one of the two twin gas chambers connected to the crematoria and marked by the Germans with numbers 4 and 5. The chambers and crematoria were opened in the spring of 1943. By comparing this information with the knowledge acquired from the drawing presenting the Gate of Death, we already know that the sketchbook had to have been created in the summer and fall of 1943.
When I look at the sketches, so moving, so full of emotion, so realistic, I ask myself, maybe the author of the sketchbook drew himself, standing on the ramp and holding his child's hand. Maybe he drew the loss of his beloved child. Maybe the author of the sketchbook is that handsome man.
But intuition is not enough to discover the mysterious artist's identity. We have to search for more clues where the sketchbook was found. It's June 1947. After the war, a former prisoner of Auschwitz, Józef Audi, is one of the museum guards. While patrolling the area of the former Birkenau camp, he passes through the section marked by the Germans as B2F. There was a prison hospital here. Today, his daughter Anna is leading us to this special place. She also works at the museum. He noticed a bottle sticking out of the barrack foundations. He wondered what it could be. He went over and removed it, and it turned out that inside the bottle there were some folded and rolled sheets of paper. The hospital from Sector B2F appears in the last but one drawing of the sketchbook. The prisoners throw emaciated corpses onto a wooden cart. But there is one more remarkable clue, that the anonymous illustrator must have stayed there for a long time.
The choice of colors in the sketches, here we have blue and red, is puzzling. We may assume these colors came from the camp hospital. Both red and blue crayons were used to complete the temperature card of patients staying in the hospital.
And the last drawing, it is not finished, and therefore even more moving. If we assume that the author of the sketchbook was a prisoner, then previous drawings suggest that he was sent to the camp hospital. Maybe he was ill and he died. Maybe he was selected by the SS doctors to be sent to the gas chamber.
But there is another hypothesis, a shocking one. The artist distinguished not only prisoners in their drawings. Another group was portrayed with great accuracy as well. In this sketch, we see prisoners taking off their hats at the sight of a high-ranking SS officer. In the details of the uniform, the artist accurately reproduced Oberscharführer markings.
Would a prisoner who was transported to the camp have the awareness and time to draw these elements so precisely? Even assuming that he or she would be assigned to work in various work units, would a prisoner have the opportunity to move around such a large area as Birkenau?
There is one more important detail in this drawing.
The inscription Deutsche Reichsbahn, meaning German railways, is clearly visible. So the author of the sketchbook must have known German very well. He might have been a German Jew, but we also cannot rule out that he was an SS man.
If we accept the hypothesis that the SS man is the author of the sketchbook, why then did he hide the drawings in the hospital barrack foundations?
Also, SS men were forbidden to document camp events, camp life, or anything happening in Birkenau. The fact that the drawings were hidden neither confirms nor disproves the idea that the artist behind the collection of sketches could have been an SS man.
We can't rule out anything, and from this point of view, the sketchbook is a great enigma with 1,000 unknowns.
In the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, there are tens of thousands of items testifying to the Holocaust. Unfortunately, there are also those that perish and bury the memory of the victims forever. The ground at the former Auschwitz II Birkenau camp is literally saturated with blood and still mixed up with the ashes of the murdered. And it still hides many items belonging to the victims. Keys, spoons, medicine packaging. Every now and again, in spring or after heavy rains, they come up to the surface.
When it comes to Brzezinka, there are cases where visitors unknowingly or consciously take parts of some objects from various reasons. Mainly pieces of cutlery, barbed wire, bricks, stones. They take them as a souvenir or to add to private collections.
For this crime, the punishment is up to 10 years in prison. But apart from criminal liability, it has another disastrous effect. For historians, the location where the items are found is of key importance. Even if visitors take an object and return it to the museum, we may lose valuable information irretrievably.
Huge former camps are impossible to oversee in 100%. Therefore, theft is a true plague. Later, when sending such stolen items to the museum, people sometimes wrote in their letters that they had bad dreams or that they felt bad with the item being in their home. Is it true? Maybe. But regardless of their motivations or feelings, nothing changes the fact that they simply robbed the world's largest cemetery.
An aerial photo from summer 1944 shows the German death factory in full swing. The murder of 430,000 people is in progress, Jews from Hungary. You can clearly see the huge column of smoke from the burned bodies. But the history of the Holocaust on an industrial scale begins in a place located by the Germans outside the Birkenau camp.
The place was photographed from an Allied plane flying at an altitude of 8,000 meters. At first glance, it resembles a strange human or animal cell seen under a microscope. But each of these spots is of great importance to the history of the Holocaust.
This inconspicuous place hides a terrifying story. Let us listen to the account of one of the prisoners who miraculously survived.
There is only a thatched peasant's house standing, once plastered white with boarded shutters. And beyond it, a huge smoke column is rising into the sky, spreading the odor of burning human flesh and smoldering hair.
Together with two leading historians studying Auschwitz and the Holocaust for years, we are going there, to the ruins of the Little White House. Look, it is remarkable that Auschwitz is perceived in historical consciousness as a death factory. Gas chamber buildings, crematoria, smoking chimneys. It all started gradually. It all started with relatively makeshift solutions. Initially, the Auschwitz camp occupied only the area of the former military barracks. A small crematorium was opened on its grounds. Every day, the bodies of prisoners who were murdered or died of disease, hunger, or exhaustion were burned in 3 furnaces. However, as early as 1941, at the orders of Commandant Rudolf Hess, one of the rooms was converted into a gas chamber. Initially, mainly Soviet prisoners of war were murdered here with the lethal gas Zyklon B. Then, the first transports of Jews. According to the preserved unique documents, the first crematorium in Auschwitz reached a combustion capacity of 340 bodies per day. But it soon turned out that was not nearly enough. When mass shipments began to arrive, they have to find new solutions. Then Birkenau appears as the place of death. Auschwitz II Birkenau, a gigantic new camp located about 1 mile from the main camp. The largest Nazi death factory in history. But murder on an industrial scale begins with cheap and primitive solutions. Commander Hess gives orders to convert 2 rural huts, from which Polish families were evicted, into gas chambers. This is how the first and the second bunker are created. From the wall colors, they are commonly referred to as the Red House and the White House. The murder sites were kept strictly secret by the Germans. This is the only photo where the Little White House was accidentally captured in the distance. However, historians have managed to trace the last path of Jewish children, women, and men on their way to their deaths. The trees we see are silent witnesses to this tragedy. People destined to die were transported here directly from the ramp by trucks to the northeastern part of the camp. Here, where the so-called Sperrgebiet was, where the exclusion zone was, a very little-known name, but very significant. Then they had to walk along the forest road, the so-called Waldweg, towards Bunker 2, the Little White House. The historical photo clearly shows the road taken by the victims to the Little White House, to their death. Even today, it is revealed by the current arrangement of trees along which the victims went. A Polish prisoner, Krystyna Zawulska, was a witness to the last moments of one of the Jewish transports.
From the ramp, the transport headed directly for the Little White House. A little fair-haired girl crouched down to pick a flower. An assessment became furious. He approached the child, not older than 4, and delivered her a strong kick. The little person fell down and sat amazed on the grass. She didn't cry. She was holding tight the stem, detached from the flower.
Last 100 meters of illusions, last 100 meters of the victims' lives. Before being directed to the gas chamber, everyone had to undress here. At the beginning, in the open air. Later, wooden barracks and undressing rooms were set up here. At first 2, then 1 more. Jews were lied to that after a long and tiring journey, they would bathe in a wash house and then be given food. But there were no real showers in the little white house. There were 4 independent rooms serving as gas chambers inside this facility, all closed with special sealed wooden doors. People were crammed inside to the limit, each time even over 1,000 people. The cost of converting the hut into a gas chamber for mass and rapid murder was only 14,242 Reichsmarks. For comparison, 4 large gas chambers with crematoria, put into use in 1943, cost 100 times more. The gas, the Zyklon B pellets, was introduced through small gas-tight windows positioned near the ceilings from the outside. Of course, these pellets were introduced by SS officers.
Cries and screams which didn't cease, now intensified. It might have lasted for 10, perhaps 12 minutes. Then, only dead silence.
Dead bodies were lying over there, jammed together, one upon another, so that they simply fell out and ended up near the door. We were so terrified that we became speechless. We had never seen such things before.
At first, the bodies of the gassed victims were buried in mass graves. Soon, the exhumation of the bodies began. Near Bunker 2, special pits were dug, burn pits where the bodies were burned. One last time, let's take a look at an aerial photo from summer 1944. Next to the little white house, there are burn pits and heaps of ash from human bodies.
Sometimes, after entering the chamber, we heard someone's groans. Once, we found a baby wrapped in a pillow. We took the small bundle to Oberscharführer Moll. Moll took it to the verge of a pit and threw it into the fire.
Also, near the bunker, a concrete floor was made where unburned human bones were crushed. Later, these bone particles were sifted through sieves, loaded onto trucks heading towards the Vistula River, and there the ashes were dumped in the river. This way, the traces of this crime were destroyed. But the Germans did not manage to hide a murder on such a scale. And if there is a crime, there should also be a punishment. The original gallows were prepared especially for the execution of the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Hess. At the request of former prisoners, it was set up in this place, a symbolic place. Why? What is this place? Let's start this story from the beginning. Under the influence of his father, the pious Rudolf wanted to become a priest, a Catholic missionary in Africa. But his fate took a completely different course. At the age of 39, he was given the task of establishing the Auschwitz camp. He had no doubts. As he himself claimed, it was an honor.
He was driven by ambition after having been assigned to this task. The camp was to be arranged in such a way that it should remain there for decades. Hus accepted thoughtlessly all orders coming from Berlin. First of all, in Auschwitz, he started to elaborate plans of mass extermination of Jews. Hus was also the initiator of building extremely expensive, huge crematories and new gas chambers, which started to appear at Birkenau from 1942 onwards.
The chair on which Rudolf Hess, the reliable administrator of the death factory, worked has been preserved to this day. In this chair, he gave criminal orders. It's hard to believe, but the revenge of the victims could have reached him even during the war. Here is a fragment of the memories of the Polish prisoner.
My hair clipper was packed. The razor was sharpened. And then I was taken to Hus's villa. I stood at attention. He said only, "Kein Wort, don't speak a word," and sat down on the chair. I was terribly frightened. First, I shaved the hair above the ears, and other hair was smoothed with the hair clipper. I thanked and went out.
After the war, the former prisoner was often asked why, while holding the razor around the commander's neck, he hadn't cut the throat of this criminal. And he answered very simply, "Because I was afraid. I was afraid that someone even worse would come to replace him."
From the crematorium number 1 chimney rose tarry smoke from the burning bodies. A sweet, nauseating scent lingered over the countryside for kilometers around. But because of the high chimney, it rarely reached the commandant's and his family's villas.
He lived with premises of KL Auschwitz with all his family, or directly at the camp area, in a villa with the interior altered at his wish, or rather his wife's Hedwig's wish.
A Polish family living here was evicted from the villa. Rudolf's wife loved luxury, and thanks to the slave labor of the prisoners and goods stolen from the Jewish victims, the Hess couple and their 5 children had plenty of everything, and they had everything for free. Rudolf's wife used to say, "I want to live and die here. Nowhere will I be like here."
We are in the private part of the Hess garden, the part where Hedwiga and her children spent a lot of their time during the war, living wealthy life. The garden was cultivated from imported plants, obtained from yards, gardens and nurseries to which the SS staff had unlimited access. We watched Dutchman's Pipe. This is one of the plants remembering this camp in the height of its infamy. It is crucial to remember that the garden was purposefully isolated and cut out from the tragic reality of the life in the camp. The life of cruelty, personal tragedies, hunger and death.
What was happening in that garden? What was the life of Hess, his wife and their children? Janina Szczurek's account is an extraordinary document. As a young girl from the vicinity of Oświęcim, she had to work in the commandant's villa.
The children of Hess, except Klaus, the oldest one, didn't hurt the prisoners working there. They were running all over the garden looking at the prisoners who were working. They once came to me asking me to sew for them some stripes with marks, like those worn by the prisoners. I wasn't aware of possible consequences. Klaus put on a capo band on the clothes of other kids. I sewed colorful triangles. The children were satisfied, and while running in the garden, they met their father, who tore off those marks and brought them home. I wasn't punished, but only forbidden to do it again.
After the war, Rudolf Hess was tracked down by the British. Released to the Poles, he stood before the Supreme National Tribunal in Warsaw. It's April 16, 1947. Former prisoners of Auschwitz demanded to perform the execution in this place. Here, prisoners were brutally tortured here. Former prisoner Stanislav Hans remembered Hess's last moments this way.
I was standing nearby, perhaps a few meters from the gallows. I thought that this Hess, who was such a fervent Hitlerite, would throw out a catchword, but nothing of this kind. The sentence was read out calmly to him.
Hess was hanged at 8 minutes past 10. But next to the dead commander in the photo, you can see another figure that doesn't seem to fit here.
It is significant that just before his death, he decided to meet with a Catholic priest to go to confession and return to the bosom of a church.
Has the criminal responsible for the death of over 1 million innocent people received absolution? Probably yes, but it's hard to be 100% sure. Because in the Catholic Church, confession is strictly confidential. There are many facts in the history of Auschwitz-Birkenau that simply cannot be explained. For example, there was a certain group of deportees who did not pass the selection on the ramp and did not go straight to the gas chambers. They also missed the brutal procedure of admission to the labor camp.
Gypsies would arrive at the camp with all they had. Nothing was taken away from them. In the camp, they were walking in their own clothes. They didn't have their hair cut. There were many gypsy carts standing on the camp premises.
But these were only appearances.
According to Himmler's decision, the camp at Birkenau was to become the place for deporting European Sinti and Roma as well. There had been acknowledged by the Nazis as an antisocial, socially awkward group that should disappear from the German and the Nazi European society.
Between the spring of 1943 and the summer of 1944, the Germans deported around 21,000 Sinti and Roma here. The section marked as B2E became Zigeunerlager, a Roma camp. At first glance, it was no different from the rest of the Birkenau camp. 30 primitive wooden barracks standing in 2 rows. However, it was a special camp. Whole families were placed there, men, women, children. Among them, also grandparents, aunts. Often whole large clans stayed there together. But it doesn't stop there. In the 2 outer barracks marked with numbers 29 and 31, a kindergarten was created, a nursery and kindergarten. Children played and learned there from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m.
The barrack interior was painted, adorned with drawings from the fairy tales for children. Behind the barrack, there was even kind of playground. There were swings and carousels.
You could hear the children laughing and their loud chatter. Even music could be heard from the family camp because the Roma kept their instruments. Sometimes they used to play in the afternoons or evenings, which was also unusual in the camp conditions. However, the crazy racial ideology the Germans believed in treats Sinti and Roma just like Jews, just like subhumans, worms to be exterminated. In fact, the conditions in the Zigeunerlager are devastating.
First of all, it was a construction area. Not all the buildings were completed yet. There were no sanitary facilities, nor there was any water supply system.
Deadly diseases rage among the Sinti and Roma. Here is an account of a prisoner who was a doctor in the Roma camp.
Sick gypsy women were lying on the bunks, arranged in groups of a few at a time, resting on one bunk. At some distance, kids were lying. There were always 100 to 150 of them. No clothes at all, no baby stops, completely nude. Kids were always crying. They were in the grip of scarlet fever, gangrene, cancers, venereal diseases, Lewis, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, whooping cough, diphtheria, measles. I found those moments most difficult for me. Not beatings, not hearing noises, but those kids.
They were lodged in such horrible sanitary conditions that they simply died standing up. This is something unique. This is something specific of this group, the great drama of the Romani people.
There is also a terrible truth behind the beautiful Romani portraits painted by the Jewish prisoner Dina Gotlipova. Let's listen to a fragment of her memories.
First, I painted a very beautiful girl. I don't remember her name. Then I asked another one named Céline. She was French and she had a distant look in her eyes. A short time before, she had lost her baby. She didn't have breast milk to feed it, and the baby died of hunger.
Dina Gotlipova had to paint these realistic portraits at the behest of an SS doctor, Józef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death. They documented his pseudoscientists' experiments and research carried out on male and female prisoners. The SS man believed that, thanks to Dina's talent, the portraits were better than photographs. On the back of one of them, there is shocking evidence, a thorough study of the human eyes that interested Dr. Mengele.
Color differences of the iris is a very rare case. These prisoners were first killed, and then their eyeballs were sent for Germany for further research.
To those Sinti and Roma who managed to survive the long months in the camp hell, a terrible fate awaited anyway. It is August 2nd, 1944. Dusk. Amid the screams, beatings, and children crying, the liquidation of the remnants of the Roma camp begins. The Germans murder 4,000 people in one night.
7 priceless portraits by Dina Gottlieb are left after the Zigeunerlager and the murdered Sinti and the Roms. She survived, and amazingly, after the war she worked as a cartoonist, among others for Disney and Warner Bros. She co-created characters such as Tweety the Canary and Daffy the Duck. She was a strong and independent woman. She finally removed the number from her forearm. She has never given up, never let herself be sucked into the depth of camp hell.
But in the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, there is another portrait behind which hides a touching story of a great friendship. This portrait is unlike any other. 2 men share identical first and last names, Tomasz Serafiński. But only one is actually called that name. For the other, it is just a false identity under which he carries out the most dangerous intelligence mission of the Second World War. His real name is Witold Pilecki.
Witold Pilecki spent 947 long days in hell and deliberately risked his own life.
On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany attacks Poland. The Second World War begins. On September 17th, the Soviet Union, allied with Hitler, strikes from the east. Cavalry commanded by Captain Pilecki destroys 7 German tanks. Poles are fighting bravely, but they have no chance. However, they are not going to give up. Pilecki goes underground.
In August 1940, the wave of German terror is already exceptionally dangerous. People disappear, and it was time to make a decision by checking the facts. And it was Pilecki who was assigned this task.
It's September 19th, 1940. Occupied Warsaw. Sunrise. Suddenly, trucks and hundreds of armed Germans appear on the streets. They drag defenseless men out from their apartments. Pilecki could easily hide, but he does not hesitate even for a fraction of a second. He allows himself to be arrested voluntarily.
To call Pilecki's deed heroism is to say nothing. When he got arrested in Warsaw, he had no guarantee that he would be sent to Auschwitz. On the same day, the Germans could have shot him down somewhere in the streets or in the woods near Warsaw. Pilecki simply dared to jump into absolute darkness.
But luck
Stopped at a certain place. You could hear shouts, screams, opening the rail cars and baying dogs. In my recollections, I would recall that place at the moment when I was leaving all that used to be on the earth and started something that must have been somewhere outside it. We were approaching a gate fitted in a fence made of wires with an inscription.
Witold Pilecki took the name of Tomasz Serafiński, a person whose documents he had already received. And under such a name, he was registered in Auschwitz.
the real Serafiński has no idea that another man is using his first and last name. Meanwhile, Pilecki quickly manages to shake off the first shock. He begins to build a camp resistance movement. The idea is ingeniously simple. Underground prisoners operate as so-called fives. Each five is independent and self-reliant. And one five doesn't know any other five. If one conspirator fails, only 4 people are at risk. not the entire organization.
Eventually, he managed to establish contacts with the external world and to ensure that information from Auschwitz will reach the Polish resistance movement on a regular basis, which is, in my opinion, the greatest achievement of Witold Pilecki's organization in Auschwitz.
From 1942, the extermination of Jews begins in Auschwitz. Pilecki becomes a witness to murder on a scale previously unknown in the history of mankind.
The alarming news about the Holocaust flowed from occupied Poland to the civilian and military Allied authorities almost from the very beginning. The answer was poor. Why? The Allies had a different logic. They said, first let's win the war. That will be the best help.
Many times in the camp, Pilecki himself was on the verge of death. It was only thanks to other prisoners that he had survived illness. This is how he recalled the moment when he finally decided to escape in 1943.
I have been here for 2 years and 7 months. Recently, I haven't been given any orders. Germans have taken away the best people with whom I worked. It's no use staying here any longer. So I am getting out.
Pilecki succeeded in being transferred with other 2 prisoners to a work squad that was employed in a mill situated approximately 1 kilometer from the camp. He managed to make new keys and open the door, and taking advantage of the SS man in detention, he continued his escape, heading eastwards.
In Nowy Wiśniec, Pilecki is to receive help from a conspirator operating there. He doesn't even know what a surprise awaits him.
On the veranda of a little house, there was a gentleman sitting. I introduced myself by using the name I used in Oświęcim. The gentleman almost jumped to his feet. How come, sir? Those are my personal data. Yes, but I have survived with them considerably longer than you have. We embraced cordially and became friends.
A reminder of this unusual meeting is a double portrait painted that summer in Wiśniec. On its reverse, there are the signatures of Tomasz Serafiński and Witold Pilecki, along with the dates of Pilecki's imprisonment. After almost 80 years, Tomasz's daughter donated the portrait to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum.
Today we got to know the history of 3 people who were extremely important to the history of Auschwitz. We do not know who the author of the sketchbook was, a prisoner or an SS man, but in both cases he risked a lot, documenting the Holocaust. Rudolf Höss, in his youth, dreamed of being a missionary, but he became a criminal. He did the most terrible, evil things without hesitating. He only started to think when he himself stood in front of death. Witold Pilecki allowed himself to be arrested voluntarily and put his own life at stake, to document evil and to resist evil. What is the lesson of these 3 stories? No matter who you are, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in, you always have a choice.